I completely lost those 3 minutes. I don't know where they went.
Stop.
You win.
Daniel's right behind you.
Oh my word. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Useless Faith.
Welcome to what?
Useless Faith. Is that topic for today?
Useless day.
No. No.
Good
Morning, Diane Castles.
Good morning to the Gugs. Guys, we almost had a green pool. I would not have
We
lived.
did have a green
I would,
pool.
yeah, but I mean on the television.
It's not a television.
I mean on the phone. It was close.
You almost had a swamp background.
I would not be.
You would have had to do a green screen.
I would not have been able to do the broadcast with a dirty pool. I can't do it. I can't do it. Miriam Vaz. Hello, guys. Enjoy the rugby?
But aren't they in Joe's now?
Apparently not. Maybe
with
she's
her
watching
headphones
something else.
No.
Hi, Cheryl. Good morning. Hope you're well. Saw some photos of you in the Berg, do I believe? Hope you've had a good time. If you're watching live or later on, welcome to our weekly broadcast. We're discussing a couple of things. Today we're talking about useless faith. Now, I know that's not a topic people like to talk about, and maybe slightly contentious as it provokes some emotion from some more traditional people. But you'll be all right. You're going to make it. Stick around.
Is he standing there?
Gaga says, where's your teeth?
Ava only has one teeth. Morning, Claudia. Ava, show them
Morning,
your one
Claudia.
tooth. Show them your one tooth. Awesome.
You can do it with sprees.
Yes. It's been really hot lately. Been very humid and yeah, just very hot. Like the pool temperature went up by like 2 or 3 degrees in a day or two's time. So I've had a bit of a really warm, yes, Miriam, a really warm time. Very humid at night. Sleeping with all my windows open last night. Load shedding.
Child by mozzies.
Lots of fun. Lots
So
of fun.
bad.
Imagine having an aircon.
Yes, imagine
Imagine.
that. Imagine that.
Hello.
Good
Ready to
morning,
go
Isabel.
back to school this
Hope
week?
you're well. Yes, back to school this week. Wow. All right.
You guys ready for school?
Great.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. Daniel's going to high school.
Dan's going to high school.
Tomorrow.
Look at that. Danielle doesn't even fit into the screen anymore.
Such a big boy.
Such a big
Such a big boy.
I am on her feet.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Okay. you too.
Aw.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Before we get going with today's topic, I'd like to just make a small announcement. I'm busy working on a little weekly discussion or study, as we've done in the past. And so this one will be regarding the idea of the devil or Satan, and predominantly from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Scriptures. And it's basically going to be like a walkthrough of all the portions in the Old Testament where the idea of Satan appears, and working through them systematically, and that combined with a kind of a religious history of the Israelites from around 1000 BC right through to the time of Christ. So I'm really looking forward to spending that time with some of you. It'll probably be done in the Facebook group format, as we've always done. So if you're interested, pop me a message and I will add you or invite you to the Facebook group once it's created. And yeah, then it'll be done live, probably on Wednesday nights. But then obviously if you're part of the group, you can really watch those videos at any time and catch up on any day or night during the week. And it's probably going to be 4 to 6 weeks. So I've been working really hard on those things. And so I'm excited to share them. Awesome. It's going to be called The Evolution of Satan. That's going to be the headline topic. What's the right word? Subject.
Topic.
Yeah, topic. Yeah, but title. Thank you, Tori. Title. All right, well, getting back to this morning, subject matter is useless faith, and I'm not, by this we're not implying that faith is useless. To the contrary, it's not, but it can become useless, so it's not necessarily useless. But and this does seem a little bit counterintuitive for people who grew up in the faith movement, where faith was the thing, the center. Everybody wanted faith. Everybody venerated those with great faith. Then to consider the idea of useless faith is quite paradoxical, I guess. It doesn't sit well, and it slightly agitates, and I think that's the reason why I chose the topic. Last week we spent time on the manifestation of love, and really today is kind of a follow-up session on this manifestation of love, just maybe from a slightly different angle and from some other scriptural vantage points. So today what I would like to do just briefly, I just want to highlight the 5 points we made last week concerning love and add one to all of them. So I can't spend too much time reiterating the meat around every one of these, but I think if you go back to next week's session, if you haven't watched last week's session, I would almost stop here, pop back to last week, watch last week, and then come back to this one. I think that will work quite a lot better. Just one last thing, we've also upgraded all the YouTube channel, and all the videos are also on there. They just get popped on after the live session. We put them back onto YouTube, but they're also categorized there so you can see what goes where, and they follow in sequence, and we've added them to specific playlists so you can follow the theme of a particular series if you like. And I think this one will be one of those, but only once it's completed we package it and pop it back into a playlist. So for those of you who would like to rather use YouTube, I think I'll throw the link into this morning as a comment. And I think that ultimately we possibly will end up with YouTube as a primary vehicle for what we're doing, just because it's so it's just way more accessible. But anyway, for now we're carrying on as we're going. So from last week we made a couple of 5 main points concerning the idea of love. The first one was that love has one single source, and that it doesn't matter where you find it or where it manifests itself, it still has the same source. Second point was that love is a one-way street. We're not saying a relationship is a one-way street, but the type of love we're talking about, God love, which we identify in the Greek Bible as basically, or the Bible in Greek, as the idea of agape, a type of selfless, self-sacrificing love that continues regardless of the circumstances. So maybe that's a way of putting it. And in that sense, it is something that comes at you whether you return it or not. And I think it is John that says, I can't remember the exact verse we mentioned last week, that he says, love is herein, or herein is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and gave, and sent. And so it seems to me like John's idea of love is that God did not reciprocate, but God initiated and continued to give. And that we spoke about that being a very otherworldly type of idea, beyond what most of us humans, when we find ourselves in relationships, or even our ideas of love, is a very reciprocal idea. It's a very supply and demand, I love you as long as you love me type of situation. And there are practical reasons for those forms or approximations of love, but it does seem like God's love is something wholly other, that it's otherworldly, and for lack of a better word, it's holy, that it's in some sense, and this is the point I want to add, is that it's in some way it's unreachable for us. When I mean unreachable, it's almost impossible for us to practice that love. But at the same time, it's absolutely necessary that love is actually the goal towards we are moving. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. Number 3 is that love is the reason for existence, and that love is ultimately also the purpose for existence, and that in some sense existence, whatever this existence looks like, I don't care if it's one universe or multiple universes, it doesn't really matter. Its origin was a desire for existence, and that we look at as love, a selfless giving of itself, an endless, selfless, continual giving. And to some degree, if we do believe that this world has some form of an end or a purpose or a landing place, a place where we rest our heads in some form of end, that also has to be love. As love was the entire thing before it existed, it also has to be the final thing in its whatever the final form of its existence looks like. Then number 4 is the very well-known idea that God is love. In other words, that you can't separate the two really. Just as God is eternal, Alpha, Omega, in the same way love is something that doesn't change. It has always been there. It's always going to be there, and we'll say a little bit more about that today. Then I want to come back to the one I added in this morning, and this is the point that love is an unreachable but an absolutely necessary goal for us as humans. And what we mean by that is that it's to practice the pure agape love of God, if I can call it that one-way street of continued benevolence is basically impossible. It's just our human nature won't allow it. We are too fearful to do it. We are afraid of being taken advantage of. We're afraid of ending up with nothing. We have a scarcity mentality, a self-preservation or a survival mentality that doesn't allow us to practice that love in its full sense. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be a goal in front of us. So, in some way, we always, when we find love in the earth or amongst humans, we almost always find an approximation of the agape love of God. It still has its source in God's love, but it never really fully can express that love. This is slightly philosophical, but I think it is important to think about these things beyond what flavor ice cream we're going to eat. We need to think about why we love, how we love, what it actually is, and in what direction is it moving with us. So in some sense, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Christianity was highly influenced by Platoism in the early centuries, and even today. If you haven't studied philosophy, it's hard to realize it, but if you read a little bit about Plato's way of viewing the world, specifically his theory of forms, you realize that this has actually formed our thinking completely. The way we think, and one of the things that I think love could fit into is Plato's theory of forms. And I'm not an expert in any of this, but Plato believed that they are forms, and they are very real, but they are non-material, they are eternal, but they inform everything else. And what we actually experience in life, in matter, in substance, in objects, is a version of that form that sits. So a good example would be a circle. There is no such thing as a perfect circle in the earth or in the world, right? It does not exist because it would need an infinite amount of points. We can't create that. No one has ever created that. But the idea of a perfect circle is very real, but it doesn't exist. So Plato's theory was basically that this perfect circle exists in a realm, an eternal, pure realm. It's very real, and we know it's real because it manifests in approximate forms everywhere. And so I think love could fit into that box, that this agape love of God is very real, very eternal, very pure, and exists, but cannot really be seen through other humans fully, just because we're always living in the approximation of it. We're always, even if we endeavor with everything to love like this, it always ends up in an approximation, a 60% or a 70% or an 80%. And by that, we are not playing that down at all. That is beautiful and good. It's just to make a distinction between the two. In the Greek, there's more than one word for love. And, we're using Greek not because any of us are Greek or because we particularly love baklava, but it's just that our New Testament was predominantly written in Greek, so a lot of our concepts about God and love in this case is actually the Greek concepts. So there's 7 words for love in the Greek. And I would like to put forward that all of these words are approximations of the agape love of God that manifests itself in this earth in forms. But I shouldn't use the word forms because I'm going to confuse people, but in ways and approximations. So for instance, I've written them down here quickly, and I just want to run through them very, very quickly. The first one is philia, which is one you might be familiar with. It's also in the Bible. It means it's the love that sits between authentic friendship. Right? It's that beautiful thing you find when you find a good friend. And there's a love that develops there that, by definition, as I've tried to put forth, can never be fully agape, but it always approximates agape. It always moves in the direction of agape. Then there's, just forgive me, I'm not pronouncing this properly at all, but storge, I think that's how you say that. And that's a love for your family, for your kin, those who are of your blood, of your genetic type, those who are with you, family love. It's a beautiful love. It's also inspired by agape love, but as you very well know, it is only an approximation of that. Then there's philanthia, which is self-love, and I think this is an important love. This is a love we need to know about and we need to think about. It's also, it comes from God. You know, to love yourself is important, and I think something that immediately comes to mind is that Jesus said, loving others as you love yourself. So that means something, and that means we do need this type of love.
Yeah.
And it needs to approach agape. Then the next one is pragma, which I think is where we're going to get the word pragmatic from. And this is a love that is high in commitment and in practical application. So this will be a love possibly between business partners. There's a love and a working together and a synergy that takes place. And then there's eros, which is in the erotic or romantic love. This love also it's a result of God's love. This is, eros is not the word for the devil's love. This comes from God. This is how He made us, and this also needs to approach agape. And then number 6 is erotoropia, which is a mouthful, but it basically means a playful, childlike, bantering love. It's something you'd find in the early stages of romantic love, but it's also, I think, if we could find a Greek word for bromance, I think this would be the one. It's not erotic, but it is playful, childlike, it's full of bantering, but it also has a beautiful element to it. The point of this just being that all of these type of loves, when we find them, if you could identify them in your life, they're almost always mutual. They rest on reciprocation. They rest on mutual benefit. But there is the one Greek love, and this is the one we're also, we're all very familiar with, which is agape, which stands out because it's universal, it's self-sacrificial, and it is so regardless of the circumstances it finds itself in. And that's what makes it different. That's what makes it otherworldly. And I think that's what makes it, as far as I can see, the love that God, according to the scriptures, is. Anyway, so that's just a little bit on the side. So love is, get back to the point, love is the unreachable but absolutely necessary goal that we need to live into and live towards. All right, so this morning I want to jump through 3 scriptures, and the one we didn't touch on last week, which is the most obvious one for any type of discourse on love, is of course 1 Corinthians 13. And 1 Corinthians 13, I don't know how much time you've spent in this chapter, but it's a bit of a problem because it just looks like a complete impossibility to me. As far as I can tell, it just goes beyond most certainly what I would be capable of. But one of the things that I've realized is that is exactly the category that the love of God falls into. So just because I can't work it out, because I can't practice it fully, it doesn't mean that it's not there, and doesn't mean that it doesn't influence everything. So let's go straight into 1 Corinthians 13. It starts like this. And I got the Message version of this story, and Message is so nice, but unfortunately, the message isn't strictly a translation of the Bible. It's more a commentary, I think, and I think that's also how it's published. And so many times, although it makes things plain for easy reading, it also misses the nuances. Because it's a translation that translates phrases instead of words. The King James is more of a word by word, where the message is more of a phrase by phrase. So it'll take a whole phrase and make it contemporary, make it understandable. The point just there is that it can sometimes lose some of the nuance. I use the word nuance a lot, but that I think is what is meant here, the more detailed ideas. And so I'm going to be reading from the King James, and apologize in advance for that. Paul writes here, he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and I have not, or the Greek, the King James uses charity, but that's from the Latin caritas, I think, but the word is agape. If I don't have agape love, I've become as a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. So these are serious statements because of the gravity of what he's actually saying, that even if you could achieve the ability to speak to angels, I mean, what type of person can do that? And if there was someone amongst us here, put up your hand if it's you, that can do that. You can actually talk in the language that angels talk, even if you could do that. And the agape love of God is not finding a place in you. You become like a tingling cymbal or a sounding brass. Now, I used to be a drummer, and there's one particular cymbal in the drum kit. It's called a ride cymbal. It's a massive thing. It's normally on the right in a traditional drum kit, and it's the high ting ting ting, and you're just supposed to hit it with the tip of your little plastic or wooden drumstick. But I do recall a drummer that used to hit the ride cymbal with the side of the stick full force and at full pace, and it definitely wasn't designed for it. And if you hit a ride cymbal like that, it makes just one heck of a noise. Horrible heck of a noise, and is enough to bring a worship service to a halt if you hit that thing in the wrong spot. And this is always the imagery I conjure up when I'm reading this. I think of my own life, as it doesn't really matter so much how clever I try to be, or how knowledgeable I try to be, or how theologically correct I try to be. If all of the things I do is not done in love and unto love and ends in love, I'm that drummer. It's kind of the typical, we can't hear what you're saying because your actions are banging too loud. And it's kind of like Paul is saying that, I guess Paul possibly could fancy himself as someone that could speak to angels. I don't know. But to some degree, he says it's really a useless exercise unless it ends in love, unless it's motivated and underpinned by love. And he goes on to say, verse 2, and though I have the gift of prophecy, the prophets are the most highly regarded people in the Old Testament, at least, people like Isaiah and Jeremiah. And, there were prophets in the New Testament, and today we have prophets. We have pseudo-prophets sometimes, and we have guys who are just conjuring up all sorts of nonsense under the guise of prophetic. But even if you could prophesy number plates and phone numbers, and you could predict the future fully, Paul is making a very, very strong point here that even if you could do that, and you could understand all the mysteries, in other words, you were the best theologian, the best philosopher, even if you could do all of those things, and you have all knowledge, and you have all faith, so that you could, and here he uses the literal thing about moving mountains. He says, but if you don't have love, you are nothing. And so I think this is where the idea of a useless faith comes into. Forget about the prophecies and the understanding mysteries and having knowledge and moving mountains. forget about all of that, because unfortunately, I grew up in the era where those are the things that are venerated. Those are the people who are venerated as well. Those are the people who are treated well in the church. Those are the people who get the front row seat. Those are the people who get the best accommodation and the best transport. And I'm guilty of that myself, of acting like that. But this says very clearly, and this is where a useless faith comes in, because even Paul, who was pretty strong on faith, I guess, says that even if you had all faith, in other words, even if you had a boundless faith, a faith that, an immeasurable faith, and you do not love, or you do not have love, the agape love of God, you are nothing. So this made me think that love must be a much larger virtue, much more important virtue in the life of any child of God, Christian, than what faith could ever attempt to be, claim to be, and dare I say, pretend to be. But I think we come from an era, at least I do, where this was not the case. All faith was the goal, because all faith brought the moving of mountains, and it brought a blessed life, and it brought a better position within the church, at least. And I think we got it wrong, because this simple sentence here says that even all faith is not sufficient. And all faith actually is, this is my understanding of it. If you have a different view, let me know. But faith is useless unless you have love. It's absolutely useless. So even a Christianity or any religion that has faith as its main virtue, or its banner under which it makes things happen, pronounces proper judgment, or claims for itself some form of superiority. Any religion, including Christianity, that has faith as the center, and it doesn't have love as the center, it essentially becomes useless.
Yeah.
It tends to uselessness when love is not the most important thing. And I think we're guilty of that. He goes on, I'm not going to spend time on verse 3, I'll just never get through anything. And my wife told me I was too long last week, so I won't be too long today. Even if I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and I give my body to be burned. In other words, okay, I said I'm not going to do it, so I'm not going to do it. If I don't have charity, if I don't have love, there's no profit or real fruit in any of that. See, these are the things that we think are important.
Yeah.
Giving to the poor, being a martyr for the faith.
So you can give to the poor without love.
No, absolutely you can. Absolutely you can. There's no time for that. Maybe we should at some point talk about it, but absolutely. Giving can be selfish. Absolutely, 100%. Giving is not necessarily agape. That's for sure. We know that. If you do a little bit of introspection, you'll know that, dare I say, most of our giving is not agape. There is very little of agape in our giving. I'm not saying we shouldn't be giving. I'm not saying we shouldn't be giving of ourselves to other people. But if we really do a lot of introspection, most of our giving is for reciprocation, because that's how our relationships work. The point is just, you can give everything, and it not actually coming from a place of love, but a place of what you will get in return, or absolutely. Okay. Don't want to spend too much time there. But then it comes to my favorite part, which is verse 4 to 7. And I think my life eventually changed, or let me say, this is one of the turning points in my life. When I read verse 4 to 7, not as an judgment on how insufficient I am in love, because I promise you, if you read this, and I'm going to read it quickly, you'll realize that we all are insufficient in this and come short in serious ways. Let me read it quickly. Love suffers long. Love is kind. Love envies nothing. Love never vaunts itself. It's not puffed up. It does not behave itself unseemingly. Love does not seek. Here it uses the her. It's personifying the love. Love does not seek her own. This is just against human nature. Love is not easily provoked. Love thinks no evil or hurt. Love rejoices not in iniquity, but love rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things. The word bear here is to cover it up, to seal it up, to be silent about things. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. And love endures all things. Now, I used to read this and condemn myself to hell, basically. I'm exaggerating, but what I mean by that is this is just unattainable completely. And then one day, I put two things together. I put together this portion about what love is like, and then I added the idea that God is love. And I realized that we could actually read this like this. God suffers long. God is kind. And I realized that as I used to read this as a condemnation on myself, but now I realize that God does not really condemn me, because love doesn't work like that. And it doesn't mean that what I do is necessarily right and good and I should always do it like that. But at least I'm accepted, because this is the nature of love. So let me read it for you in a new way. God suffers long. God is kind. God envies not. God vaunts not himself. What does the word vaunt mean, Tori? Let me have a look here. Do you know what it means off by heart?
No, but to me it sounds like flaunt.
Boast. Yeah, flaunting. It doesn't boast itself. It doesn't flaunt itself. Yeah, I think it's the best word. It's not puffed up or egotistic. It doesn't behave unseemingly. God seeks not his own. Hello? Hello? Anybody out there? God is not easily provoked. I think Paul should send this to Moses. I think Moses needs to hear this. Or if not Moses, the writers of the Torah. They need to hear this. Because I think I'd pay money to see Moses and Paul discuss this one. God thinks no evil. God does not rejoice in iniquity. God rejoices in the truth. God bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. And I think my life changed here when I realized that God wasn't exactly the way I thought he was, but that Paul was actually here breaking open slowly a vision of God that the Old Testament just can't give you. It just, I don't care what theological hoops you jump through for the Old Testament, it can't get to this. It's just not possible. And therefore my view that the Bible is more of an evolution of our view of God than a box that fits all ages exactly the same. It just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't fit that way. When I realized that this is a new vision of what God actually is, because God is love, this is the way that Paul started understanding the love of God. And Paul had a journey within himself, you know. And I think part of Paul's journey is actually explained here. We'll read it in a moment. So it goes on from here saying that love doesn't fail. Now the word fail here is not exactly fail. The word is more like it never falls away, or it never ends, or the message, I think, says it fades. The message says, I think it says, love never gives up, but it keeps going until the end. And this is another thing that makes the love of God, the agape, if we're allowed to say that, makes it different from brotherly, family, erotic, bantering, and what was the other one? I think there was one more. Anyway, that's what makes it different from all those types of love. This one never gives up. It never falls away. It can't be destroyed.
Lasts forever.
It lasts forever. Let me read the Message version for you, just for a little bit of a different perspective. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for itself. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut Love doesn't have a swelled head. It isn't always first me. It doesn't fly off the handle. It doesn't keep score of the sins of others. Let that one sink in a little bit. And we're reading this with respect to God, right? Because the picture of God that some people have is really the opposite of this. God doesn't revel when others grovel, but takes pleasure in the flowering truth, puts up with everything, trusts always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. And I think if it's possible, that we could start thinking about God in this way, it will really change our lives. Because ultimately, how will we ever, or let me rather say, how do we approach the agape love of God? We can only approach it if we start understanding what it actually is.
Yeah.
And until you have a better view of God, you will never move in that direction. So, for the time that you, for lack of a better word, the Moses idea of God, if that's your idea of God, that's the direction you'll be moving in with your life. Now, I'm not here to talk about Exodus, but we've done this in previous chapters. It's just a mercy on those that love you and a destruction for those who hate you. It's just not what this is. This is not compatible. I'm sorry, it's not compatible. And it is not plausible to say it's not compatible, so we don't worry, we just don't understand it, but both works. It's just not. We can't do that, because then what we're basically doing is we are reducing love to gibberish. It's becoming, if love doesn't even mean love to us, how are we supposed to emulate it?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to look up to it? How are we supposed to understand God as love? We can't. The answer can't be it's above our understanding. It's a cop-out. I'm sorry. It's a cop-out for not being willing to realize that even the idea of love evolves throughout the scriptures as we become more aware of what God really is and what He is also doing in us.
Yeah.
All right. So he goes on to say, love never fails, back to the King James. But wherever there are prophecies, they will fail. And it's not fail as in they'll be wrong. It actually means they will actually stop. Right? Your prophetic gift is a temporary measure. So are all the gifts. They are temporary measures. It's the fruit that lasts. Right? Love, if you look at the fruit of the Spirit that we find, I think it's in Corinthians, there really is it's actually all is, I think it was Maniki that once said that the fruit of the Spirit is like an orange. And each one of those 9 fruits that's mentioned in Corinthians is actually like a slither. What's it called? Is it called a slither of the orange? No, there's a better word for that, surely. Segment? Yeah, the segment of the orange. And that all together it forms the fruit. But I also believe that together it actually forms the idea of agape love. Because it's exactly what Paul is. Many of them are mirrored right here in 1 Corinthians. So they will fail. In other words, they will end. The tongues, they will end. Even our knowledge, our theologies, our understandings of God, our great traditions that we believe are so perfectly accurate and unreproachable and absolutely true. All of these things, these knowledges disappear. These are not the everlasting things. It's not the beautiful doctrines we believe that are everlasting. They're just not. It's not our knowledge that is everlasting. It's just not. It always changes. But the thing that is everlasting is the idea of the selfless love of God that is slowly but surely pushing into the hearts, the mind, the consciousness, and I believe ultimately the unconscious part of the mind of humans. The glory of God, really the image of God in that sense, right? These things all fall away, verse 9. And I think I'm going to be ending with this little portion. We'll go on later on with the rest of it. But Paul acknowledges something very important here, and I think we'll all, including our best theologians and our best pastors and whatever you want to call yourself, the humility that Paul expresses at the end here is also an integral part of what love is. It's a humility, right? So look at the humility that Paul puts in front of us when he says, "For we know in part." In other words, Paul is not writing this. Now I'm gonna step on your toes here, because Paul's not writing this from the perspective, I have just received an inspired revelation of God. This is how it will be forever, and exactly how it is, and this is the only way. He acknowledges that currently, he says we, right? He includes himself. He includes Christians, the best amongst them. And I think he includes all of humanity, really. And he acknowledges we actually just know in part. We only have, each of us have but a share part of the whole. But he's also acknowledging this of himself, Dory, which contradicts the way that most people read Paul, because most people do not acknowledge that Paul saw in part, but saw Paul's view as the ultimate view of God, which Paul himself never saw or understood. So that's one you have to work through on your own. I can't help you too much on that one, but the point is that Paul says, we know in part, and even our prophecies, our best attempt at inspired speech is still in part. Everyone, including this speech, including the speech of every pastor today from every pulpit, it is in part. Every beautiful prophecy is in part. Everything. And what part really means here, he explains it then by, he gives us a, later on in verse 12, he says, it's like seeing through a dark glass, right? If you have a dark glass, I don't know if you've ever walked up to a glass that's been tinted or a window, and you're trying to look in through the wrong way, you basically can't see anything until you get really, really close and put your head right against it, and then you can see only sometimes shadowy forms of the real, and that's kind of what Paul is speaking about here, I guess. Or if it doesn't mean that, he means some form of horrible old ancient mirror that doesn't do the job very well. But the point is the humility of realizing that the knowledge, the gifts, and I would throw in here the doctrine, the dogma, all of the things many of us are so absolutely sure, all of them are very, very relative, because they are seen in part through a dark glass. But there is one thing that it seems like Paul sits and puts at the end of everything else. Thing that is, the word here for greater in the last verse, that love is greater than faith and hope, is louder, it's older, it's higher. And it seems like Paul lifts this one idea of love, the agape love of God, above everything else, above faith. And so what is a useless faith? Well, a useless faith is just a faith that's not grounded in love, or a faith that doesn't produce love. And I think we Christians, let me say humans, but as a personification of that, Christians, we're really good at pushing our faith down people's throats, our opinions, our doctrines, and actually losing the love element altogether, because we think we're doing God a favor. But in fact, we're fighting God because we're no longer operating in love. I think if we can see that, Christianity will change altogether, but we are really, really struggling with this because we think faith is the most important part of what it means to follow Jesus. Somehow, because, faith is important, but I think it's because we read the life of Jesus, and every time he says, your faith has healed you, your faith has made you well. So what is the most important thing to us? We want to be healed, we want to be well, so faith is the most important thing we need to. It's a give to get, like I'm going to be faithful, I'm going to go to church every day, I'm going to believe without thinking any doubtful thoughts, because then I will then I will be blessed. It's just once again a subpar form of the love of God. The love of God is the most important thing. It has always been, and it will always be, and everything else will fail. Everything else will eventually have to bow its knee to the supremacy of love, even our doctrines, our dogma, and our statements of faith that we so love and worship. So, Paul points into the future. I'm rounding up. And he says, we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect is come, then with that which is in part shall be done away. So Paul is looking forward. Paul does see his life as part of the process, up and into a place of what he calls perfection. right? I don't know what you want to think about that. Whatever you know. Will there be a time when everybody will love perfectly? I probably don't think so, but I do think we'll approach something like that. I think that's the direction we're moving.
Yeah.
I think that's what Paul is talking about. And it's only in that which is part, that which is not face-to-face, will actually become a clear seeing of face-to-face, a clear understanding. But all the other things, all the vehicles, these things fall away. And if faith is your end point, you're going to miss the boat completely. Okay, so I want to stop at verse 10 of 1 Corinthians 13, and I think we'll pick that up later. But I do just want to end with a couple of thoughts on the idea of useless faith, because I think from what we could see here is that even if we did have all faith, whatever that means to you, a blind trust, no doubting thought, a great positive life of positive confession only, whatever you see under that, even if it is just trust, even if you see faith as trust, which is how I view it. Faith in God for me is trust in God. It's not a belief in a doctrine. It's the trust that God will do what he said and that he will be what he said he would be. But whatever that looks like, I trust the intention that sits behind it. Oh no, I've lost my train of thought slightly. What was I saying now? Anyway, the point is just that even if I have all the faith in the world, if it's not rooted and pointing towards love, it is useless faith.
Yeah. Even if it doesn't get to perfection, is what you were saying.
Yeah, I think of my own life. I think so. I can be very hard on myself, but I also have to be honest with myself. And I'm hoping that when I am honest with myself, others would be able to identify these things in themselves as well. But I think of my life in ministry of the last 18 years. Many times faith was the goal and not love. And it's wrong. It's missing the point. And I've written down a couple of things that I just want to read to you in summary. When religion points to faith as the main and final virtue, it has completely lost the plot. It would be like the discoverers of old who made their ship, that traveling vessel, their final destination and shamelessly declare their arrival. It'll be like a modern traveler, maybe like me and you going on holiday, who never gets off the plane and ends up camping on board in the toilets as their holiday destination. It'll be somehow like a baker who never actually bakes the cake, but serves up a sloppy doughy mess into fancy side plates. Faith has purpose and meaning only as far as it finds itself rooted in love and consumed by that love. Outside of love, it's just another human weapon used for selfish political gain. Faith can be useless, and I've seen a lot of useless faith in my own life and in the lives of people around me. And I think we need to grow up into the idea that love has always been the goal. And love is a practical thing. Love is an experience. It's not a dogma. It's an experience. It's the experience of giving. And next week I want to talk about the kind of a definition for love being a feast. Because agape as a noun in the Greek means it's a love feast, and what that means. Thank you so much for joining us. Check out all the useless faith. In other words, let me add, to save myself from a lot of criticism, the profitable faith is the one that fleshes out as love. So faith is profitable, and we know it's profitable when it produces love. Thanks so much for being with us today. Have a wonderful Sunday. We'll see you next week. And
Yeah, have a good week. See you next time.
lekker. Cheers.